Hi, and welcome to Merixstudio's modernization-themed LinkedIn live session. I'm Aleksandra, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. Our topic today is software modernization team dilemmas. And today we are joined by two amazing guests, Wojciech and Tomasz. Hi, guys. How are you?
Hello, hey.
Hi, I'm fine.
Before I introduce our guests, let me start with some housekeeping. So this session is scheduled to last about an hour. First, we'll have a discussion between the three of us. Then we'll have some time to answer your questions. And of course, we can't wait to read your opinions, to read your comments, and to answer your questions. So leave them in the chat box. On LinkedIn and in comment box on YouTube. And I also have some good news for those of you who can't make it today, because we'll be recording this discussion. Then we'll post it on Merixstudio's Insights, and of course we will notify you via our social media. Okay, so I think it's high time I let my guests introduce themselves. Wojciech, could you first tell us about your experience in IT and about what you do in Merixstudio?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a senior project manager here at Merixstudio. Basically, I've been managing IT projects for the last 6 years or so, I guess. Most of them in software house environments, basically. I'm a huge Scrum and Agile enthusiast, so happy to share some of my thoughts about this kind of projects as well. And basically, what do? I make sure the communication is smooth, and I make sure that all of the sides involved in each project, each product, understand each other, basically, and support all of our teams and support our clients in whatever they need, basically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wojciech. Tomasz, could you tell us a few words about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tomek, and currently I'm a backend engineering manager at Merixstudio. I have over a decade of commercial experience in this field, in the field of backend development, of course. Currently, my role is focused on development teams, helping people to grow, improving internal procedures and tool sets, and also recruiting new specialists on board.
Thank you, Tomasz. Thank you, guys. I'm really excited to have you both here. It will be very interesting to listen about these two approaches, the project manager ones and the developers. Okay, so I think we are ready to begin. I'd like to start with kind of a basic, but I think a very important question. Because software modernization is usually singled out as a separate service on software houses' websites. And it's usually juxtaposed against greenfield project development. So my question is, do these types of projects are really that different? So how does software modernization differ from greenfield projects? Tomasz, could you begin?
Mm-hmm. Sure. From my point of view, I think that the software modernization projects are different in terms of the state that you meet the project for the first time, because every time you start a greenfield project, then you can choose whatever technology you want. You can use your own preferences or do some research and pick the technology that you think that would be the best fit for the project. But in the software modernization, you enter the project, the decision already have been made about the technology used, so you have to adjust to what is already there. Many times there are some dependencies or technologies that are outdated, so you have to think in a different way. You have to take many things into consideration on the start. So it requires much more experience and much better knowledge of the tool set that is used in the project. So the entry work is much bigger in terms of software modernizations in comparison to greenfield projects.
So put shortly, it's not as simple and it's much more complex.
Yes.
Wojciech, do you think you can add something to that?
Yeah, of course. I totally agree with Tomek. Of course, that's basically what the difference is, but that has some implications, basically, which are very important from my point of view, right? As a manager, as a Scrum Master, basically, of the teams. So the biggest difference, which I would like to state, basically, is that modernization is a marathon, not a sprint. Basically, the biggest difference is that they take longer, they last longer, they are less dynamic compared to greenfield, MVP, proof of concept, and that sort of stuff, right? So if we are taking over a project from proof of concept state, let's say, it's sometimes very difficult for the clients to understand that we need to slow down a little bit. You know, that crazy Eldorado of deploying every day or every 2 days new stuff and adding new features and functionalities on a daily basis. Sometimes, you know, just basically to be faster, to get to the market as fast as possible. That's in most cases already past, right? So this also, ski is not the key here, exactly due to the topics that Tomek mentioned, right? You cannot decide quickly right now. You have some boundaries that you need to take into consideration within every decision you make. And the biggest thing is that every change has an impact on a huge amount of functionalities, code base, and so on and so forth, because most likely the product is already big. So we simply cannot afford to go as fast as previously, right? Yet still, you can go fast, accordingly to Agile or Scrum, basically, and deploy regularly at the end of each sprint, for example. But it takes longer. Sprints are usually a little bit longer. So yeah. And the last thing, I think that's worth mentioning, is also a little bit more difficult to maintain engineers' motivation here in this kind of projects, because I would say the main reason is that there's a little bit less creativity needed compared to greenfield projects. Basically, as Tomek said, the devs do not have the possibility to decide about everything, right? They need to comply to the rules that very often were set by someone else. So they first need to understand those rules, which takes time, and then comply to them. And sometimes it's not easy.
I'm really happy that you brought up this human topic, because that's, after all, that's the topic of our today's life, and that's what I'd like us to focus on today. But before we move on to that, I have one more question, because you mentioned Agile, and you mentioned that software modernization projects also can benefit from this project management approach. But then again, if you research the topic of modernization, you can quite often stumble across waterfall, for example, and these methodologies. So would you say that Agile is always a way to go in software modernization, or maybe it depends on some factors?
Well, that's a tricky question. And as always, it depends, right? Me personally, I think you can do any kind of project in an Agile way. Maybe not Scrum, but Kanban or whatever else. Because, you know, we need to talk about the basic principles of agility. So the basic principles of agility is to make a small step, see what happened, and adjust and adapt to that, right? And to be perfectly honest, from my point of view, modernization projects and long-term projects are ideal for agility, because you are forced to do small changes either way. Everybody's a little bit scared of them, and you need to have time to decide if that change is what you is the thing that you actually wanted, and adjust to that. So to be perfectly honest, I can't imagine a modernization project where you release once a quarter, for example, or even longer, because, you know, the sheer amount of changes that you do and the potential regression, that's almost scary if I think about that. So yeah, definitely. And of course, Agile was created to help projects and products that were previously managed in waterfall to get better, basically. So that's the core idea, right? How can we manage long-term waterfall projects better? And that's why the manifesto was created. So that's the root cause, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to our topic, team dilemmas. Before there are any dilemmas, you first have to compose a team. So how do you do it effectively? How do you build a strong software modernization team? Tomasz, maybe you have some tips on that.
I'd answer with the most frequently used answer, it depends, because it mainly depends on the strategy that you want to follow during the modernization. In Merixstudio, we offer 3 default strategies. Of course, this is just a proposal, and you can pick anything in between of these strategies. But the proposal is that there is, for example, a lift and shift, which mostly follows the mechanism of moving your service to the clouds. In this scenario, you will probably build your team out of DevOps engineers mostly. Of course, there will be required some project manager to coordinate the work. There is also a strategy that's called complete rewrite, and in this strategy, on the other side, you would need a complete team, developers, backend developers, front-end developers, QAs, because you would follow a normal procedure of developing a fully stretched project in this case. So you would need specialists from all the fields, yeah, that's mostly it. Depending on the strategy, you would compose your team differently. But the main rule would be, in opposed to starting a greenfield project, you would need much more expertise from these engineers, because of the reasons I've mentioned previously. This is a project that requires more knowledge, more experience. So I would strongly suggest picking the senior developers for this projects, or regular devs if they are strongly motivated in doing such a modernization.
And how about the skills? Are there any particular ones that will definitely push the modernization project forward? Is there anything that you should bet on as a CIO wanting to modernize their legacy system in terms of skills?
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, I think technical skills are very demanded here, because you need to dig into the code that was written some time ago, but it may be written in a not best, using not the best guidelines that are currently there, and also, I think that soft skills are very important here, because you need to communicate with the team, communicate with the client. You need to present complex ideas in a simple way so that the client could understand what are the consequences of some decisions that you would probably make. And also communication in the team is very important, because there are so many factors that can go wrong, so that you have to think in advance of the possible consequences of your actions. So and the consequences may manifest themselves not only in your field. I'm talking from the perspective of backend developer, but anything you do on the backend may manifest itself on front end also, and so, or if there is a mobile applications, it can manifest itself in a mobile app. So you have to communicate with the team, and you have to think in advance of what will be the consequences, basically, of any decision making.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Tomek. And I guess from my point of view, those are the two main topics as well, right? So being able to communicate very complex stuff and to present to the client or to the team the outcomes of our actions, which can, sometimes be visible very far away from now, right? Compared to greenfield, it's not, it's not the case of adding a feature and it works, right? The regression might be huge. So for that reason, I agree completely that you would rather have to think about experienced senior devs, or at least have someone who could take over a role of a technical leader, basically, for the rest of the developers, right? Because of course there's always place for less experienced guys or girls in such teams, and they need to learn from someone, right? But I would strongly recommend to create a strong core. For example, if it's a broad application, senior and very experienced front-end, back-end, and mobile, for example, dev, and build the rest of the skill set around that to create basically a self-organizing and fully skilled team. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I believe that those who are listening to us right now and watching us now definitely know what to look for in the potential team members. But I guess that the success of software modernization projects depends not only on skills, but also on the domain knowledge and the access to the domain knowledge about the business, about the product. And it's easier to mix these two, so tech knowledge and domain knowledge, if you're running the modernization project in-house. But what about situations in which you decide to outsource it? So the entire process or part of it, how to facilitate this transfer of knowledge? Tomasz, do you have any tips?
Sure. I think that a solid fundament for this would be performing some kind of workshops that would include, in the perfect scenario, the client or the technical person that has a huge technical knowledge or the business knowledge, and on the other side, from the side of the company that would be actually perform the modernization, it would be good if there would be some facilitator with a background in, for example, event storming or any other, let's say, technologies or techniques, maybe is a better word, for obtaining the knowledge from the client. So this is one thing, and also a good documentation would be of the currently existing solution would be very helpful when overtaking the project from a different company. Also, it would be perfect if there would be some point of contact with the company that developed the previous solution. So if there is a chance of obtaining the knowledge from the person that was in charge of developing the previous solution, it would be very helpful to have someone that you can ask any question at any time and just obtain the knowledge that you are missing currently, and just to skip the reverse engineering process of some idea and just have 5-minute talk with someone and to explain what was the idea of the author of some line of code, for example. Yeah, so I think workshops is one thing, documentation and some point of contact is basically it.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, chip in a little bit, basically from my point of view, what is very important also, besides the technical stuff. I think the most important thing is that, if we take into consideration that we're going to be working together for quite a long time, right? We are modernizing together a big product, most probably. So the relationship between the vendor and the client, basically the owner of the code base and us, for example, Merixstudio as the company that's getting in, is very, very important, basically. So what I like to tell, and what I would really love to happen every time, is that once we meet, once we start working together, please think about the delivery team from an outsourced company, basically not as executors of your idea, but more of a consultants, sometimes quite very strict reviewers of your plans and of what has already happened, right? And keep in mind that we do not know quite a lot of what happened, what has happened before, why some decisions were made. We will see the outcomes of those decisions, and most probably you will see within the code base or within the process or procedure that something most probably could have been done better. And well, at least we at Merixstudio, we will raise those topics. So please be aware that if something was hidden under the rug, it will most probably be found sooner or later. So and when it happens, be patient, because there most probably was a very good reason why that was hidden or why some decisions were made. But also take advantage of that. Maybe now is the time to fix that, right? To pay that debt, for example. And the second thing, totally agreeing with Tomek, transferring the knowledge about not only the technical side, but also about the business during the pre-development phase is very important. So think not only about, passing the code base and delegating one or two devs to, show the code base and what's going on. It's equally or even more important, at least from my point of view, to deliver a valuable solution, which is basically delivering the business value for your company, right? So if we won't understand the business and why do you even bother creating the product, it's going to be super difficult to maintain it and modernize it in the future. And of course, I'm going to tell this whenever I can, like a mantra: keep the team in loop and be very conscious about the communication, right? Because you don't know quite a lot of stuff that we do know, and we want to share it with you, and it works the other way around. So please remember that if you start cooperating with, for example, Merix, we have a couple of hundreds projects already finished. So we've seen quite a lot. Even if you're a investor who has like 5 or maybe even 10 startups under your belt, most probably we have a little bit more. So feel free to use that knowledge and use that experience, right?
So make the best of what we already have experienced.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess it all boils down to mutual understanding and just knowing that we are here to do our job on both sides.
Of course, being honest, transparent, key values, right, of good cooperation.
Yeah, it sounds very easy and very basic, but sometimes people forget about it. So it's really good to reiterate on that. Okay, in the meantime, I can see that some comments are already appearing in our chat box. Thank you for that. We'll have the Q&A after the discussion, but also feel free to ask us more questions. We can't wait to go through them after we finish. Okay, at the beginning, Wojtek, I remember that you said that one problem with modernization can be team motivation. So generally, I get this feeling that sometimes modernization projects get a bad rap among developers. So they are not very well liked or desired. Is it really true?
Well, it depends. As always, it depends who's working on it. But well, generally, yes, I guess they are, right? Because the obstacle. Every developer and basically everybody who works, with his head and with his wants to be creative, right? Everybody wants to, challenge obstacles in a creative way, use the newest technology when we're talking about IT, Sometimes maybe even try something that you have never tried before and see what the results are. Basically be creative and, you know, have the space to maybe sometimes even fail, right? Without very big consequences. Unfortunately, within modernization projects, that's not the case in most cases, right? It cannot happen, right? So you can't just, you know, implement a completely new library, for example, because one is already implemented and you need to work with that. You maybe want to try to refactor it a little bit, change something, do some small tweaks or so, but not too much more. But on the other hand, I've also met some guys who really like working with this kind of projects because that's a real challenge, right? They felt a little bit tired with creating yet another, you know, logging mechanism, payment mechanism, and so on and so forth, and they wanted to do something a little bit more difficult with those restraints. So they also have some good sides, right? And you can find still good things about those projects, but in most cases, that's why we said previously with Tomek, and we agree on that. Those are mainly the projects for developers who have seen quite a lot and are basically mentally ready to manage these kinds of completely different problems and issues, and what's most important, who know how and want to foresee into the future, as you know, sometimes a very long way, and not only foresee the results of their own work, but also the work of other people around. So yeah, they have a bad reputation, but definitely I wouldn't say that they cannot be rewarding or satisfying. So from
So
my
it's a
point
mix.
of view, also, you know, the one other thing is that, you know, if you work with greenfield and startups only, you don't really very often work with live apps which actually have users and you see what they do. And here you do. So if you wish, if you're tired of creating yet another startup, I mean, if you're a developer tired of creating another startup that you don't really know what's going to happen with it, because, you know, the market stays for itself, right? What percentage of new products stay with us for longer? Then look for a modernization project. So.
I would add to that as Wojtek said, more mature projects struggle with completely different category of problems that new projects do, because if a project is on the market, if some solution is on the market for a couple of months or years, then you have to deal with such issues as some bottlenecks in performance or database queries, and you have to face a completely different category of problems and come up with different solutions that you would normally do when starting a greenfield project. So if you are looking for some new experience or some new challenges, then definitely software modernization is a way to go. And that's the one thing. And another thing is the bad reputation of this kind of projects is there. Of course, I agree with that. But you have to keep in mind that what is the cause of, or maybe I would put it in a different way. The software modernization is performed because of some reasons, and the reason probably is that the code is very, very tightly coupled. It is hard to maintain. It is very hard to add new features because the legacy is so big that if you touch one thing, it would have impact on 10 different things, and you would not know what can blow up simply. And if the architecture is poorly designed, or if there is no architecture at all, just say spaghetti code, then it is very unpleasant, and it may be a challenge for anyone to enter such a project. But you have to keep in mind that every time you start a greenfield project and you don't follow the best practices, you don't keep in mind the architecture, then you are producing a legacy from the start. So if you even start a new project and you would perform poorly on following the best practices, then every new developer that you join your new project after a month, they enter actually a legacy project with the legacy that you produced. So the best practice would be not producing the legacy code in the first place. And the only difference here is that if you enter a modernization project, then the legacy is not produced by you, but someone else. So you have someone to blame for the poorly written code. But you have to keep in mind that everyone had some point in his life that when you were learning new things, and the main success was when the code was actually working, and not how it was written. So this is another level of experience and another level of being a good developer, when you not only put your attention on the code, whether it is actually working, but also whether it is maintainable, whether it is testable, whether a new developer that would have to maintain your code would be able to do it in the first place. So yeah, that's from me.
So Tomasz, do you mean that it's kind of a mistake to think about tech debt only in terms of software modernization and these very old systems? Is it something that's building up from scratch, like from the day one when you start working on project?
Of course, this is absolutely true. Most of the people, when you are using a phrase legacy project, they think of a project that was on the market for, let's say, 10 years, and it was written in a language that not currently exists, and the people who written it are already dead, probably. But this is not true, because as I said, you can produce a legacy code in 2 weeks or 1 month, and if you don't follow any good practices, or there is no architecture in mind when developing the code, you already produced a legacy code, and it would be very hard for any new developer to enter such a project.
Okay, I see. And you mentioned that there are some developers who enjoy taking part in modernization. But I suppose that even those who are really excited about, tampering with the old code and seeing the progress can experience some burnout sooner or later. So how do you prevent that from happening? How do you keep your team engaged and motivated? I know that it's not possible, every day, but I suppose there are some general rules and tips for that. Wojtek, do you have any of them to share with us?
Well, yeah, from my perspective, the most important thing is to keep the team understanding and up to date with what they are actually doing and why, right? Because you're doing everything for a reason. One of the main reasons is, and also please remember that in most cases, if someone decides to modernize a project and has a budget for it and agrees that it's going to take a very long time, then most probably that product is already a success, right? So you are then working in a successful project from day one, although it's completely different and very difficult. I think that's one thing. The other thing is to keep the team very close together, right? And the team that is, well, in most cases, it won't be just one team. So there are two topics that I wanted to talk about. Keep the team very close to each other and don't allow them to, silos each one into a different, into a mindset where, okay, I have a task, I'm going to finish it, and I don't care about the rest. That's basically one of the biggest challenge, to keep that mindset set. Guys, don't do it like this, because, you're going to be creating legacy on a bi-weekly basis, basically, right? And the other thing is always try not to silo the whole development team from the rest of the company. Update the team on sales, update the team on marketing strategies, update the team on customer feedback, have the designers on board also. So the constant flow of communication and of understanding and of the vision and the goal, basically. Why are we here? Why do we have to struggle so much? And what's at the end of the road, basically, right? We can see the light, but please tell us what that light is exactly. So it's a little bit easier. So I guess those are the most important things when it comes to keeping the team motivated, right? I'm not gonna talk about pizzas, beer, and that kind of stuff because it's quite self-explanatory. I can tell you that is sometimes if the team is really if the team is great, then you can even change a late night deployment, post-deployment bug fixing into a party afterwards. So yeah, it is doable. It's hard, but doable.
I also think that it would be a lie to say that this kind of project is for everyone, because it's certainly not. It requires a certain attitude, and you have to somehow answer, as a developer, you have to answer a question: what is the source of your motivation and fulfillment? Because if the main source of your motivation is providing a code that is just working in the simplest possible way, then probably this is not for you. But if your source of motivation and the feeling of fulfillment is when the code that was written poorly, suddenly, after weeks of hard work, is written in a very in a way that is maintainable and accordingly to the best practices, then you can certainly join such a modernization project, because this is something that you would find very fulfilling for you. So I think that this is my personal opinion, but I will say it anyway. I think that with seniority, if the source of the motivation moves gradually from, if you are a junior, then you are motivated when your code is just working. But after you become a regular or senior developer, this motivation moves gradually towards not only providing a working code, but also the code that is a high quality code. And that means that the code should be testable, should be maintainable. This code should be self-explanatory. It would not require any additional comments inside. Just the naming of the functions and the structure would just explain what was the meaning of the author. So that's why I said that it's mostly for senior developers, because the source of motivation is different in terms of this kind of developers. And certainly the software modernization is a type of project that would give you this feeling of let's say, moving from a poorly quality code towards the better and better quality. So yeah, that's basically it. Also,
maybe to add on top of that, two more things that I think are also very important, and they walk alongside with seniority, which Tomek mentioned, is that more senior devs will be most definitely more vocal about what they see and what needs to be changed. So if you want to keep the team motivated, listen to them, because they know what they are talking about. So, and me as a Scrum Master, as a project manager, I need to ensure that they are being listened to, and the changes that they want to introduce, of course, after a very, after a review, after deciding exactly and talking through with the rest of the team and the rest of the company, are actually being implemented. And one sometimes very tricky thing that is not very obvious for many people is that, you as the owner of the product, must prepare yourself to sometimes manage organizational change or maybe even procedures within your company. Because I've already seen and I've already experienced cases where some actions of the system were reported as a bug, where actually that wasn't a bug or undesired feature, but the system was representing basically a process, a procedure within the company that was using it, which actually was not going very too strong, but basically stupid and it needed to be changed. So also remember that you have a mature product, and sometimes if it's a product that is being used internally within your company, the beginning of modernization of the code base of the software may lead to also changes within your organization itself and your processes. And to be perfectly honest, for me, I always take that as a good thing, right? Because it's always good to find a reason to get better at something. But it is not very well. Most commonly, it is not very obvious when these things happen. So,
Yeah, probably easier said than done sometimes.
well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's loads of useful advice from you guys. I suppose that from now on, every modernization project should be really a piece of cake for everybody watching us. I have one more question to you. So you told us a lot about motivation, about the fears of developers taking part in modernization projects. But what about the red flags that CIOs or CEOs or tech leaders should watch out for when starting and running a modernization project? What can be suspicious, and what can foreshadow the end or the backfiring of the project? Tomai?
Well, okay.
Okay. From my point of view, the main red flag may appear when this is something that relates to what just Wojtek said in a minute ago. When you meet some resistance from the client side, when you detect some strange behavior in their process and you want to improve it somehow during the workshops that are a pre-development phase, and you suggest some changes, you suggest some improvements, and you expect the client to be open to this. But instead, you meet with a reaction like, we've done it for decades this way, and it has to stay this way. So because the process is fine, and we don't want to change anything. So anytime we meet this kind of reaction, this kind of distance from the client side, it is a struggle for us, because we have to follow the process that we already know that is not perfect. It could be better and it could be improved, and this also translates to worse, let's say, satisfaction from providing this kind of solution, because we have in mind that we would modernize this solution, not only the solution but also the processes, and yet we don't have an opportunity to do so. So I'd say that this is probably the main red flag that can be raised.
Yeah,
I
I think that the big question here is, how to see the red flag, how not to miss that something is going terribly wrong, or we're going downhill. Well, for me, the biggest red flag in any project, but also in modernization, is when the team is getting silent, where nobody doesn't even care to raise another idea, for example, because they know that the resistance to change is so big that most probably it's not going to happen, right? They are burnout, they are tired, basically they don't care anymore, or start feeling so burnout, and basically they don't see any they don't see the results in the future being worth it. And the biggest red flag for me is when they are getting silent. That means that you need to talk to them really fast and be really honest, and especially when you start to notice that if they give you feedback, most probably they won't give you the most honest feedback, because they most probably have already done, but it wasn't heard, and no action points were there. But if this happens, you really need to focus on implementing even the smallest changes, smallest improvements, 1% improvement, Kaizen style, basically. Change the time of the meetings, change very small things to start moving forward again and get motivation running. So, yeah, because,
I would add that this is also a red flag when it happens on the client side, because
exactly. Yep.
if you meet a situation in which a client's engagement into the project is decreasing, and the client doesn't want to participate anymore in the, let's say, Scrum ceremonies or the reviews, and the client doesn't want to give you a feedback when you demand it, and the client doesn't accept the changes on time, and you don't have any idea what actually is in the head of the person that actually is involved in the process, then this is another red flag for you, because you are not closing the feedback loop. You are probably off the track, and it may appear that after some time, after a month or two, the final vision of the product would be so different than what the client expects, that it would cost very high amount of time and money to actually be again on the track with the project. So it's both being silent from the team side but also from the client side is very bad situation, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, guys. I think I'm done with my questions, but now it's the time to answer questions from our audience. So let's start with Jan's question. Jan asks if you could share some of your experience in modernization projects. So what difficulties did you have to face in the last projects, and how did you handle them? So maybe you could share one example from each of you.
I don't know if I can, NDAs and stuff. So it's not gonna be a very direct answer then, Jan, sorry. But basically, yeah, for the last 2 or 3 years, I'm mainly focused on modernization projects. And to be perfectly honest with you, the things that we've been talking about previously are the biggest problems that I had to face with my teams lately. And I guess the most recent one was an issue of taking over a project without, basically with little to none handover from the previous team. The product is quite big, very complex, and for some reasons completely to which we had absolutely no influence on. We had just like 1 or 2 1-hour meetings with the previous team that we've been taking over from. And how did we handle it? Communication, location, right? Basically, we were very, very vocal, very transparent, sometimes very brave with contacts with the client. Basically, we were stating very clearly what the issues were, what we need to do, basically on a daily basis, to be honest. And what might also seem strange, we agreed with the client that for the first couple of sprints, not couple, 4 or 6 sprints, we will not be planning in very high detail, because we basically have absolutely no idea what can happen, right? So we went very, very agile. The sprints were overbooked, but the results and the outcomes, the increment that we did provide, although small compared to greenfield projects, but fixing one issue which leads to an increase in sales or delivery for like 10 or 15%, that's a huge improvement. So now we're getting a little bit more stable. so it's getting a little bit normal and on track right now. But I guess that's what happened. We were courageous, transparent. The client luckily was open-minded. He did understand what the state of the product is, and he was aware of what's going to happen, and we were aware as well what our task at hand is. So, yeah.
Okay. Tomasz, your story?
I think of two, but I would select one. I think that there was a project. I know that there was a project that I participated in, and the problem in this project was related to the decision makers had already made a decision that they want to modernize the software, and they had some deadline that they wanted to fit into of delivering the let's say new modernized version, and they wanted to start the development as quickly as possible. But from our experience, we knew that we have to firstly discover what is there to be done, and we had to propose a discovery session in the form of workshops with the clients, so to gather the knowledge about the business knowledge, and this is something that the client was very, let's say, they wanted to make it as short as possible because they wanted to start the development phase as quickly as possible. And we knew that there is a lot to be discovered. So we had to find a compromise and come up with a solution to somehow start the development process and parallelize it with the ongoing workshops. So we started workshops first, and after a week of workshops, we also started development on the things that was already set in stone during the workshops. But in parallel, there was also workshops ongoing, and we were discovering new things and providing the work for the developers. So it was somehow two phases overlapping. And this was the solution to the client's demands. So it was a challenge for us.
So a lot of multitasking at the same time.
Yeah, multitasking and communication. Again, this is something that Wojtek mentioned.
Okay. So we're still waiting for some more comments because we have a couple of minutes left. But in the meantime, maybe I have one more question that just popped into my mind. If you could give a CIO wanting to run a modernization only one piece of advice that they could remember, what would that be? What would that be, this most important tip for them?
Only one?
Yeah, I know it's difficult, but maybe you have something that strikes you when it comes to successful modernization projects.
I would have to say be patient, basically. Patient is bliss here, right? You need to be patient, and you need to listen to people around you, because you have hired them for a reason. They know most probably what they are doing. If you think that they don't know what you're doing, then be patient and explain that to them, right? Be patient listening to them, be patient explaining what you actually want. That would be the simple one, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And Tomasz, do you have that one final tip?
I think I would say that coming up with a list of your priorities would be something very helpful. You should prioritize your goals and think of the things that you want to do in the first place. What are your biggest pain points currently? What is the thing that is really hurting your business currently? And try to address these issues in the first place. And do not perform the modernization just for the sake of modernization. You should think of the main goals that are there, and always keep in mind to go for them and not be distracted by some new technologies emerging or something like this, or someone telling you that Workday solution on, for example, cloud-based solution, and you are hosting your solution on premise services, and this is the cause of your pain, and just follow your goals, and that's it probably.
So hype-driven development is definitely not the thing to do.
No, if you want hype-driven development, sell your product and start a new one, and keep on the hype. Basically, create a second, third, fourth startup.
Okay, I see. All right, so thank you guys very much for a very interesting and enjoyable discussion. I definitely learned a lot, and I bet that our audience also learned a lot from you. If you come up with any questions, you can leave them in the comments under this video. So we'll try to answer them after our stream. And as I said at the beginning, we'll share the recording with you so you can access it anytime you want. Thanks again, and see you next time.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you for having me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.